Alrighty, let's get started for today. Um, Thank you for posting in the little warm-up activity. Uh, I know the summer classes can be kind of tough. I guess some of you guys are taking another class too. What other class? Oh, wow. In the summer too. Wow. Well, I hope this class has been manageable with the other one. Yeah, definitely a lot, but um if you think about it, we're like almost halfway through. It's crazy to think about that. And then boom, two more classes done. So hopefully once the semester, June semester ends, you guys could kind of relax a little bit, enjoy the rest of your summer. Even if you have like another class going on, hopefully it'll be not as stressful. And hopefully this class too is doable for you guys. Um, and also for the upcoming test, I know it's crazy that we're already going to be talking about a second midterm. Like we just took the first midterm. Like where does the time go? But you guys did really well on the first midterm, so I wouldn't worry too much. Um, the second one will probably be very similar, with more of an emphasis on chapters 5, 6, and 7. So not as much on chapter 8 because it's going to be taught the day right before. So we want to make sure you guys have like enough time to go over everything. But yeah, if you guys have any questions or anything, just let me know. I've been trying to respond to as many emails as possible because I know Pearson has been an absolute mess. And honestly, at this point, I'm really debating writing them a letter because it's honestly really bad at this point. But thank you guys for putting up with it and doing the work. And again, if you have any problems or concerns, just make sure to email both myself and Kevin, and we'll try to fix it as soon as we can, whether it's giving you the points that the auto grader took off, or just manually grading something, or if you need to know how to solve something, or you don't know where a function is, we're here to help. So again, if anything is giving you any issues, just let us know. We can always go over it either during lab or during office hours after class, whatever works. So with that being said, for the warm-up, we're continuing a little bit with data. So we have a box and whisker plot. So this might be a little bit of a review for anyone that's taken a statistics course or just, have seen one of these in a while. So our box itself is showing our overall average scores. There are three quartiles in this box, right? Quartile 1 is this first edge here. Quartile 2 is here in our middle, the median, and our quartile 3 is going to be here at the edge. Now, we often will have outliers with data. The good part about a box and whisker plot is that the outliers are not affecting the gist of our data here. If we had one car that was going super, super slow at 8 miles an hour and one that was going at 44 miles an hour, we don't want that skewing that the average is about 20, right? 12 to 24. That's usually about the average speed that these cars are going. So having this box and whisker plot allows us to really observe what is the more often data and what is our outliers. So our smallest value we know is 8, largest value is 44. Our median is going to be right here in our quartile 2. We have our first quartile here at 12 and our third quartile here at 24. So sometimes it's a little easier to think of these as like, let's say we had test scores or something, right? This is how when we're dealing with specific test scores and data, how to manage that, right? If most of the students are scoring within these three quartiles, right? And we want to say the gist of the data, right? We don't want to include someone who did super, super well if we want to curve our data, right? You're probably saying, oh, someone who got 100 on the exam while everyone else is getting like 60s. That's not fair to the average person because someone got 100. Either maybe they just knew the work really well or maybe they cheated, and that's not fair to anyone else. So these box and whisker plots are very handy to really observe what's going on with our data more so than just saying, oh, okay, this is the mean, this is the median, this is the mode, which can be skewed by a lot of outliers. Okay, so today we're going to be going over chapter 6. Again, the lab assignments and projects are going to be on our little syllabus here, right? Um, you guys had like a kind of an extra day during lab to work on chapter 5. Tomorrow's lab will be for chapter 6, and Monday's lab will be for chapter 7, which is great because it gives you guys an extra lab right before the exam on Tuesday to actually kind of review. So that way it's more of a designated review time, not so much trying to cram both a lab and a review into one. So I'll be sure to update the next week soon enough. Crazy that we're already almost into week 3 at this point. But just to kind of stay on track, make sure that you're staying on track with these 3 chunks of assignments, right? Those are going to be due Monday the 15th. So we've moved the deadlines from Sunday nights to Monday nights. That way, yeah, hi, sorry. Um, I'm sorry, what was that?
The chapter 6 and 7 books is the numbers 1 to 10.
No, I'm sorry. It's supposed to be multiple attempts. By default, it's been giving us like 1 attempt, so we have to kind of change it manually. It's Pearson just acting up, but don't worry, you will have multiple attempts. And if for whatever reason it exhausts all your attempts and you need more, just email us and we can always reopen it. Yeah, of course. Yeah, so you guys will definitely have multiple attempts for all the homeworks and projects. Unfortunately, Pearson just doesn't like to work very well. Yeah, so otherwise, your grades for the first week's assignments should be in uh likely tomorrow or Friday at this point. And I'll make sure to incorporate any extra credit that's needed, as well as any extra points. For instance, for that one question that just did not let anybody enter the score in, so everyone's going to get universal 2 points on that without any question. But yeah, any questions before we get started for the day? Okay, awesome. So today, kind of the before the warm-up question, kind of like the icebreaker, was a little bit foreshadowing this, where we're kind of thinking of the high point and low point of our week. Well, we're also going to be doing that with what if analysis. We're going to find what could be our highest and lowest, our best and our worst case, without having us do all the work. So if your boss comes and says, I need you to create this prospect of how all of these different tax rates would affect our business, let's say, right? And there's like 50 on the page. Well, you don't want to have to manually code out 50 tax rates. That would be absolutely crazy. And while we can use our fill, right? What if I ended up moving those references a little to the side? We know references are very volatile. If I move one reference, well, the formula is not going to work anymore, which is going to be a major problem. Using what if analysis allows us to have Excel do the hard work for us. So Excel is going to be the one that's actually making all of these prospects for us. We're going to tell it exactly what variables to change and apply to a given formula, and it's going to fill in the blank. We'll be doing it on a smaller example, but if you had something that was 50 different tax rates, right, and you might be moving this data around, this is something that would be extremely handy for that. So, firstly, we've been dealing with a lot of different ranges of data, right? And we know that our data itself is based on just the cell names. So, if I had, let's say, something like here, right? I know that this is A2, this is A1, blah, 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 etc. Right? But if I want to say, okay, this is a chunk over here, and this is a chunk over here, right? I want to essentially show that these two are individual chunks. I know that this is going from A1 to B8, but if you're dealing with a very big range, right, you might not really want to be dealing with that, right? You might want to name it something a little bit more intuitive. And this is where we get into our range names. So we can choose to name specific ranges. Instead of just saying A1 to B7, I could be more specific. I could say, this is my APR rate for 5%, right? I could say, this is my APR rate for 1%. So by doing this, I don't have to guess, oh, is this for this tax rate or is it for this tax rate? Immediately, I know in the range it's for this one. So it makes it a little bit more human friendly to read. There are a couple of rules though. So you can actually have this range contain up to 255 characters, which is quite a lot. So you can be pretty descriptive with that. You must begin it with the letter or an underscore. So I can't start with a number, I can't start it with any special characters, etc. Um, but I can essentially combine these together in the range name itself. So just to keep in mind, if you wanted to name it something, right? I can't really use my special characters. I can't include spaces, but I can include underscores. Think of it as a file name system, right? If I'm naming a file, I would call it like my file underscore and then like a date, let's say. So I'm not going to be using spaces for that either. So as long as I follow these rules, I can call a range name anything that I want. All right, so maybe I have something based on grades, maybe I have something based on tax rate, etc. Again, these work totally fine, numbers, letters, etc. I can't have a space, I can't have a percentage, can't have a number starting it off, right? So rate 25 works, but 2025 rate, not good. So it just really makes it a lot easier to see what these specific ranges are corresponding to, right? So let's say we want to switch this up a little bit. If I go to my formulas over here, right, I could go to name manager here, right? And this is the same spreadsheet that I was using yesterday. So it has different ranges from the previous labs that we were working on, right? Like when we were dealing with the book titles. So these are all of the previous ones. But let's say I want to essentially define this as APR 1%. I'm going to define the name, and by default, it's like input area. So I want to say this is APR 1%. Now, I can't just say APR 1%. This is going to give me an error. Instead, I'm going to call this APR 1% like that, right? And this is going to serve as an alias for this range. It's hard-coded here, so I know that here is always going to be called APR 1%. So now anytime that I want to refer to this, right? Let's say I wanted to refer to this entire range for something. I can now use it in a formula if I wanted to. It's right here in my name manager. So this is handy for something like summing up a lot of values that might be in all different places, right? I know I could sum up values like this just by putting my sum and summing up a column or summing up individuals. But if I had a bunch of things that were like here and let's say here, right? I could define this as something, right? And it's referring to all of these guys. Let's say I want to sum it all up. I could say use in formula, right? Test. So it's going to select all these guys. And I'm just going to say that I'm going to sum them up, right? So I'm just going to sum up test. So it summed them all up. So in case I don't want to end up hard coding a formula myself, right? Using the name manager, I could select the range that I want to use, give it a variable name, and then I could use that however I want. Now, this is a simple example. I'm adding up a bunch of unrelated values. Doesn't really have to do with it, but this has a great use for having data that's kind of all over the place. Maybe if I went back to my previous example from yesterday, I want to sum up all these wholesale units, right? They're in two different columns. Okay, sure, I could code up some G2 through G14 and H2 through H14. Yeah, that works. But if I'm using this range a lot, maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I want to define it as a range and then use it for multiple functions, right? It's the same as creating a variable essentially, and having that variable stand for this. Okay, so aside from that, right, you can also create different names from this as well. So if, let's say, I wanted to base this upon a row or column, let's say, I can create names from the values in the top row. Maybe I want to base it on headers and I want to duplicate those headers on multiple pages. That's something I can do. The left column, maybe there's some headers down there that I want to use as well. I could use the bottom row, I could use the right column, etc. So these are all kind of presets that allow you to define different ranges, but ultimately you have the power to pick whatever range that you kind of want to work with in that case, right? So if I wanted to find the name myself, I'm going to use the little box up here, define name. If I want to create from the selection, right, this is going to allow me to base it off of predefined sections that are commonly used. And all of them will be found in our name manager. And from here, if you wanted to, you can also create new ranges. You could edit, you could delete. For instance, the ranges that I had from yesterday's stuff, if I don't want to have them in my name manager anymore, maybe I'm not really using them for this lab, I could just delete them from here. If I had a lot of them, I could filter too. You should call them things that are descriptive, right? For instance, if I see that it's based on the textbooks, then I know exactly what it's for, right? But if I'm just saying that it's amount of loan or purchase price, right? Maybe there's multiple purchase prices. I need to be a little bit more specific. But it will always specify where it is actually going to be referring to. Okay? And again, we can insert them into our formulas. Okay. So that is our range. So before we go on, there's going to be just one short question on Amplify, if you want to answer that really quick. Okay, so which of the following is a valid rule for creating a range name in Excel? So we want to make sure that we are not using spaces, that we don't begin with a number, and we can't include these special characters. We can have up to 255 characters, and we must begin with either a letter or an underscore. Otherwise, you're free range on how you want to define the range. Okay, so let's go on. So that was range spaces, right? Now we're going to be taking things into the what if analysis part. So when we're essentially analyzing our data, if we don't want to do all the work for us, we can have Excel do it for us. So instead of us actually experimenting with values, have Excel do it for you. I can use different variables with either a one variable or we'll go over as well a two variable data. And essentially, it's going to refer to a placeholder value that's going to get replaced by the variables that we specify. So if I say replace the percentage for all these guys, I'm going to give them a list of percentages to use, and it's going to go one by one by one and replace my percentage in the formula with the ones I specify. These are called substitution values. It's a value that Excel is substituting with a list of values we're using instead. Think of it if you're going to a shop, right? You're going to buy a shirt for yourself, right? You're going to substitute your current shirt with maybe a blue shirt, a green shirt, a red shirt. You're going to try each one on and see what you like. Excel is doing this for you, but with data instead. So we can also, actually, that's kind of strange. That really should not be in that order. All right. So before we go into that, let's quickly pivot into series. Um, so for series, just gonna do it super, super quick. If you've been in a math course, right, you probably might have gone over sequences versus series. And essentially, that it's going to be taking specific values and finding kind of a pattern. For instance, simple example, let's say we do the even numbers, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay, I know it's numbers that are just simply multiplied by 2, right? So the good part is we have an extra fill option here that allows us to do this via our series. So if I go to my home and my fill command over here, right? This lets me take it one step further. We know the fill command by default is going to just fill either a copy or fill series, but this is going to take it one step further. I can now change it to trend in a specific way. Maybe I want to go from 5% to 5.5% to 6% to 6.5%. And maybe the Excel doesn't really pick that up immediately. Well, I can code it here and say, make it into a series based on this column. I can use linear growth. Growth is exponential, right? So linear would just be multiplying by a common factor or adding technically by a common factor. Growth would be more exponential. I can change it by date, and I can even autofill items this way as well. So I can step by a certain amount. This is the amount that I'm going up by. So if I want to control this more so than just Excel picking up on a pattern, I could say, I don't want this just going from 5% to 6% to 7%. I want this to go from 5%, then increase by 0.5%. Now it's 5.5%, etc. Maybe I want to have this end at a certain value too. I could have it stop at a certain percentage too. So this allows it to be way more specific than just dragging and dropping, right? If I just wrote 5% and I did a fill series, right? By default, it's going to fill by copying 5%, but I know I can change that to a series, but it may not pick up on that I want it incrementing in 0.5 intervals. Most likely, it'll just go from 5% to 6% to 7%. This allows me to be much more precise with this. So if I go to my Home tab and I go to my fill command, I'm able to change this in all those different ways. And perhaps I want it to be increasing exponentially instead. I want to change the dates. I want to change any of this kind of stuff. This allows me to have full control over the series instead of just using the little box the way we've done it in the previous examples, right? So again, if I wanted to essentially just drag and drop any of these values, right? By default, it's going to copy. If I click on this, um, it's not picking up on a theme, right? So maybe I want to go home and then I want to go to my fill tab, right? I want to go to series. And let's say instead of increasing by one, let's try exponential growth. So this is now going to essentially take it, let's say, by two, right? And now this is multiplying by two every single time. So our linear is going to just kind of be adding. If we're taking our growth, we're going to be multiplying in that case. So we could see it's increasing, increasing, increasing. Now that we know the trend, right, I can now put it onto the rest of these if I want to. Oh, look at that. It didn't pick up on the right series. No matter, I can just go back here and do it ourselves. Or even see, maybe flash fill might work correctly. And it doesn't. So sometimes Excel's not always going to be able to do everything for you. You might have to go in and hard code it yourself. But even if you have to do that, you have the fill command and you can do it just like that. So it can do the work for you. So that is one way of having Excel pretty much fill in all of the results for you. But for the next part, we're going to end up taking it one step further and do it via a data table, right? This is going to be our what if analysis for a one variable option. Okay. So instead of doing it manually, right, with these series, we're going to now have Excel be doing the work for us. So if I take a look at over here, I'm going to just copy and redo this on my end so we can take a look at what's kind of going on here. So we have our just a cost of home, right? It costs $300,000. I wish in this economy, homes are like in the millions. We have a down payment. Someone only has $50,000, so they're putting a down payment on that house, right? Again, not in this economy. Then we have our APR, right? We have our annual percentage rate. We have the number of years for the loan. And then from here, we're going to just calculate the loan itself. So how much is the loan? Well, I'm just going to subtract the cost from the home and cost the down payment, right? So this is just referring to these two guys being subtracted from one another, right? Now, how do I calculate a monthly payment? Well, this is going to end up using that PMT formula. Would not worry about this for the purposes of this class, but I will say if you're dealing with accounting, economics, etc., chances are you will be using this formula. We are in a computer science class, therefore we are not going to dabble in that. But for the purposes, we know that it exists. We know that it is going to get us our monthly payment. So it's going to just do our formula for us, right? It's going to take this B15, right? Going to divide it by 12 months in a year. We want to get the monthly payment. Then we're going to take our B16, the number of years for the loan, multiply that by 12, because again, 12 months in a year. Subtract now our B18 amount of the loan. This is now going to get us our monthly payment from there. Okay, formula is doing the work for us. Now, I don't want to have to recode that formula. All right, there's a lot of stuff going on there. I'm not doing that work. Even if I end up using a series to change the values, right? I don't want to have to change that, right? And maybe the APR changes. Maybe I want to compare different banks to see which one gives me the best rate. So if I wanted to do that, right, maybe I had a variety of rates here, right? 4%, 4.5, 5, 5.5, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Okay, I don't want to have to manually code this. So instead, I'm going to use our one variable data table for this. So this is what we're essentially looking for, right? We want to apply our formula and find the monthly pay rate compared to all of these rates. So to do this, right, we're going to take it step by step because First, it's a little bit confusing. I'm going to first have my one variable that I am changing, right? One variable means one substitution. We're going to be learning about two variables soon. That's going to be two variables. So we're going to end up having a row, a column, and a row of data that we're substituting in. Okay, I'm just going to copy this and paste it down here. Okay, and again, I could have way more values if I wanted. It's not a big deal. But right now, we're just going to stick with just a couple of values here. Okay, next, what I have to do is I have to get my formula, right? I need a reference to the formula that I'm going to be copying. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this value right here. This is B19. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to have equals B19. So this is just a copy of this, right? I could have just left this the way it was, by the way, and I could have put all these percentages down here and did it down here if I want to, but I'm just separating this just to show clearly what's going on. So otherwise, there's kind of too much going on in that range over there. Okay, now that I have the formula that I wish to copy, and I have the percentage rates here, right? Now I have to tell Excel what is it that I want to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight over this, right? And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to my data tab. I'm going to go to what if analysis. We're going to go through all three of these guys today, but for now, we're going to stick with the data table. So I see that I have row input cell, column input cell. Okay, so these are referring to where am I substituting my values from, right? So I know that I am substituting my values coming from over here, right? So I want to essentially change this to become a column input cell, right? So I'm going to be starting off from my D13 over here. This is my first value that I'm going to be using, right? Oh, okay. Hang on a second. I messed this up before. And let me just double check what it was that I needed to do on this. Again, sometimes Excel could be a little bit tricky at times, so it's good to have a little bit of you have your notes next to you. That's why our exams are open notes, right? In reality, you're always going to have your notes with you when you're dealing with your own work, right? Okay. Oh, okay. That was the problem. All right. So ignore everything that I had just said then. So what we're going to do, we're going to highlight over this again. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go to what if analysis data table. Instead of specifying, right, where I'm starting here, because this is already highlighted, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say column input cell, right? I'm going to specify what am I substituting in. Okay, I know that I'm dealing with this formula right here. This is my PMT formula. This formula itself is doing a bunch of stuff, but all I care about is the substitution variable. What am I substituting? My APR. So this is what I am substituting in, right? And I'm saying column input because I'm substituting 5.5% with this column. If I was dealing with a row of data, instead, I would put B15 in the row input cell. Again, I can put my data any which way that I want. So this is now saying, okay, well, you're going to now, there we go. You are replacing this value with these values in this column. So all of these guys are calculated right from there. We know it's correct because notice 5.5% is in here and I'm getting the same number. Now, of course, these guys are not formatted in currency terms, but we know how to fix that, right? Go to home, select all these guys, click our little dollar sign, and voila, we got them right there. So the key with doing this one table one variable table, right? Have the formula ready, right? Our formula is right here, okay? I could have just done it here too, right? This is just a reference to my initial formula. Totally fine. Have a column or a row of all the values that you want to sub in. Then, when you're using your what if, the value that you're going to change here, right, is going to be your row input cell, column input cell. I'm dealing with a column of data. And what am I switching here? Well, I'm swapping out my APR. So this is going to now say in my formula, the cell that I'm switching out, the value I'm switching out is B15. So all of these formulas here are using this reference, but switching out B15 with whatever is in this column. So this guy is using 4% as a replacement of B15. This one's using 4.5%. This one's using 5%, 5.5%, 6%, right? Our substitution variable is telling us this B15 that we specified is being subbed in with everything in our column. Okay. Or I go on. Does that make sense? Because this is a bit of a confusing topic. Okay. Again, stop me if you have questions. So we pretty much just went over that, what was here. This is just kind of another example, right? Actually, it's pretty much the same example, never mind. Um, right, so again, over here we have our APR, we're switching it out. Okay, and again, you can do this for multiple things too, right? We're going to end up using this on a two variable table in a minute. But for the time being, if I wanted to, if I had three different functions up here, right, I can simply use it on each of these columns, right? So maybe I had a function here that used a different down payment. Maybe I had a different function here that had a different number of years for the loan. I don't know. Whatever it would be, I can essentially put any formula I want up here and use my what if on all these values, right? And it's saying plug in these values in my substitution variable of these formulas. So long as these formulas all use that same variable I used as a substitution variable, then I'm good. I could have all these different formulas that all do different things, but they all use that APR rate. So I can essentially repeat that over and over again for any of these guys. And all of that done with our one variable data table. Okay, you could format it as well if you need. We kind of did that manually by changing it to currency if we wanted to, but let's say you wanted it in a certain fashion. You can easily go into our format tab right here, which we kind of have gone over a little bit before. I would just say focus on the main ones that we know, like general for just plain old text, number, currency, accounting, time, date, percentage. The rest we really don't need to know, but it's good to know in case, let's say you have a certain place that you have to essentially switch things up with. Okay, so then we get into a two variable data table. So instead of now having one thing that we're subbing out, right? And instead of just having the formulas up here, now we're subbing in two variables at a time. So maybe now I'm subbing in the APR rate, but I'm also subbing in something along this row, right? These are going to be the down payment variables now. So if I have something like that now, right? Let's do it again. I'm going to copy and paste this guy down here, right? We're going to aim for something that looks a little bit like this. right? So I'm gonna put in all of my rates here, and I'm gonna put in all of the down payments here. Okay, so the key here is we're kind of making a matrix, meaning that we're having rows and we're having columns. So it's two-dimensional now instead of one-dimensional. So at the intersection of each of these boxes, I am subbing in 4% as my APR and 40,000 as my down payment. 4% as my APR, 50,000 as my down payment, and on and on and on. So we're going to follow the same steps for this, but now we have two dimensions. First, have a reference to my formula, right? We're still using that monthly payment formula. This time I'm putting it in the top left corner, right? Before, when we were doing it, we put it above where it was going to be printed. So two very different places, right? Whether it's a one-dimensional data or two-dimensional data. Notice how many more pieces of data it is. It's a much bigger data table going on. I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to go what if analysis data table. Okay. Now we had filled out column input data, input cell, right, as our APR rate, which we'll still do again. But now row input cell, we also have something within our row. I want to switch all of these guys out. What am I subbing it with? Well, I want to sub it with the down payment variable. So this is telling me swap your B15, your down payment, with all of these guys, and swap your APR B16 with all of these guys. And voila, we got it. Now, a glitch that I kind of ran into, or well, I thought it was a glitch at first, was I kind of went a little bit too trigger happy with the autofill and I accidentally had an extra row over here, right? There was no percentage given. So how did it get these things, right? Well, it puts 0 in here by default. So if these don't match up, right? Maybe I accidentally, oops, I filled in an extra column by accident. It's going to treat this as if it's 0 and calculate the formula as if there was just a 0 here, right? And I could essentially verify that by just putting a 0 there, and it still would pretty much keep it the same. So that allows us to essentially switch things up, right? We can just pretty much see at a glance immediately how switching these variables, whether one variable or two variable, would end up being, right? And if you notice, let's say I switch this to 2%, right? Let's say I switch this to 10%, etc. All these guys change, right? I don't have to worry about recoding the formula, especially with something as crazy looking as that, right? So using what if is a major superpower. Okay. Are we doing? Okay, I think I need to hurry up a little bit more with this. So again, formatted to way table. Okay. Let me finish up goal seek, and then we'll do the last one with scenarios after a short break. Okay, so the previous ones that we had gone over, right, say that we have the data itself that we want to use, we want to experiment with. What if I don't know? What if I have a goal that I want to get to? Maybe it's an exam score that I want to get, right? Oh, this is a great idea, right? Maybe you want to see what do I need on my second midterm to get an A in the class, right? Use your goal seek function, right? So what this is going to now do is I'm going to essentially set my formula cell, right? Just like before, right? Just like before when we created our formula cell reference at the very beginning. Then I say my goal. What goal do I want? Maybe I want $800, right? I only want to pay $800 a month. Who knows? Then what am I changing? What cell am I changing here? Okay. So if I'm going to be changing the cell now, right, this is my substitution variable. So what was I dealing with a substitution variable before? Well, I was dealing with the APR rate. So here, right, this is saying change cell B3. This is going to say, how does this down payment affect if I ended up changing my down payment and I want to get to 800? right? So by doing this, I work backwards. Instead of showing what the results are when I change the values, this time I want to find out what the value is itself. I want to find out what do I need to change my down payment to in order to actually get to a goal of 800. So this allows me to essentially work backwards in that case. And to do that, right, we can just go access it the same exact way. What if analysis? We're done with data tables. We go to our goal seek, right? I want to set my cell, right? That's going to have my formula on it to value, I don't know, let's just say 1,000. Okay. By changing cell, down payment was the one we were dealing with. So let's see what happens. So it just changed. It automatically changed my entire formula here, right? So it said this is the target value, right? I said I want 1,000, right? Monthly payment. I wanted that to equal 1,000. It automatically changed my down payment to the right amount that would give me that. So notice I'm only changing one variable at a time. I'm saying, what is the value of this in order to get that? What is the value I need on my second midterm to get an A in the class, right? So the same thing is happening over here. Now it automatically changes that. Great. I'm going to just reverse that and we're back to the way it was. So I'm free to change that as much as I'd like, right? And essentially now I can work backwards if there's a specific goal that I want. So if your boss is saying, hey, I want you to make X amount of money this time, well, this is the way you can do that. Okay, so let's take a break. We'll come back in 10 minutes at 12:10, and then we'll finish off. Okay, we still have a few minutes on the break, but if you're returning early, just if you could, there's two questions on the Amplify, uh, on slides 5 and 6, question 2 and 3. Just when you get a chance, we'll go over them, after the break. Okay, if you haven't already, please fill out the last two questions on the Amplify, question 2 and question 3. They're on slides 5 and 6, and we'll go over it in about a minute or two. Okay, so let's get started. Okay. So question two, how does the presentation define a substitution value in the context of what if analysis? So we know our substitution value is going to be what is kind of going to be replacing and changing our value itself. So we know that the value that we were dealing with before was the APR, right? That percentage. So that's going to be what gets substituted, right? So we're essentially saying that it's going to be that value, right? That's going to replace the original value of the variable, right? It's going to be all of those percentages that we're substituting into the variable itself. So each of them acts as a variable, right? So whether it's 4%, 5%, 6%, they're getting subbed into that specific place in our formula. So that's why they're called substitution variables, right? We're not the ones that are manually changing it, right? So it's not that we're changing it, right? If we were going to be the ones to change it, then you would just be hard coding the formula itself. The magic of the what if is that Excel is the one that's going to be doing it. It's automatically getting replaced in that case. Okay. And then when creating a data table with substitution values listed vertically in a column, where must you enter the first formula reference? Okay, so we know that when we were dealing with a one variable table, we had to essentially place our formula above and to the right. So it was kind of like the column header for all of the values that would follow, right? Now, if I was dealing it with the other way around, right? Let's say I had to transpose these guys, right? I'm gonna copy these guys and paste this and then transpose it. Okay. This time, we have it reversed, right? It would end up being over here instead. The transposing didn't exactly work very well in this regard, but we would have it essentially be the row header for the row itself, just like this is the column header for the column itself for all of those values. So it's going to be one to the right, one up, or one to the left, one down, depending on if we're dealing with vertical data or horizontal data. Okay, so that's going to be one row above, one column to the right. All right, let's finish off strong with the last couple of topics. Any questions before we get started again? All right, so aside from dealing with one or two variables at a time, maybe I want to deal with more than that, right? And I want to be able to switch easily between different scenarios. This is where the scenario manager is going to come into play, right? Maybe I have a best case rate and a worst case rate, right? I want to essentially set them each as different scenarios. So instead of just saying, okay, just give me all the examples of 4%, 4.5, 5, etc., I want to be able to switch my actual data here anytime that I want for the best case, the worst case, etc. So if let's say I have over here, right? I have my APR here I have as 1%, here I have it as 5.5%, right? So yeah, I could copy paste and hard code it, but this is not the best way of doing it, right? What if I want to have a bunch of different options, right? And I don't want to necessarily just keep copying and pasting it. We want a way better way of doing this, right? So what I'm going to do this time, right, is I'm going to go to my what if, and we're going to handle the last one that we haven't covered, scenario manager. So I had originally created a best and a worst case, right? So if I wanted to essentially create an average case, let's say, what I do is I click this little plus sign. I say scenario name. I'm just going to say average, which I clearly can't spell correctly. I did not have enough coffee. And then, right, I could say, what cell do I want to change? Well, I'm just changing B4. That's my APR, right? I could change different cells if I wanted to. I could do a cost for the home, change all the different home and see how that would affect my monthly payment or other things like that. But I'm just going to say average, right? Okay, and let's just say I did 1%, I did 5%. Let's just say something's in the middle, 3%. All right, so now I have best, worst, average. So if I change these, right, I click on any of them and I click show. It's going to switch my data to the best case, 5%. Do worst case, it's going to switch to 1%. Do average, it's going to go to 3%. Right? So I can easily switch between any of these guys. And I don't have to worry about copying my data. I don't have to worry about losing the value more specifically, right? I'm saving these as various scenarios. And again, I can do this for all other things too. It doesn't just have to be for the same exact cell. Maybe I want to change the cost of the home instead. I'm just going to call this home one. And this time I'm going to only change cell B2, right? Maybe I want to see if there's a home that is like cheaper, what the monthly payment is, and what if it's more expensive, right? So I'm going to do that, right? I'll keep this as the original, and I'm going to make a home two for a home that is way more pricey, right? So let's say I do that, and this is going to be now 600,000. Okay. So now, right, I can switch between home one and home two, right? It just switches the cost of the home. I could switch my best, my worst case, any of these guys, and it switches it as I please. So I can do any combination and switch this without having to go in the cell, type it. Oh, shoot, what was the previous version that I had? Right now, they're all right here. So I can mix and match and choose and then don't have to worry about losing the values. And if I need, I can just go edit. I can change it as I please, and I could see exactly the value that it would be. So this is a very handy way of doing that. And it was just giving a hashtag error because the number was too big, but we can just double click here and it fixed the issue. So I could freely switch it and notice that any references to that also changed. So this guy up here that referenced all of that, that changed. If I had my two D variable over here, data table, right? This would end up changing as well. So if I ended up changing my APR, right? Notice it's referring to B4. I could change B4 by going into my scenarios. Column input cell, right? This is going to be down payment. Okay. And again, these are just formatted a little bit weird, and it's a much bigger number. So because of that, they're in scientific notation. We can switch things. We can go to currency if we want. We can widen tabs. It's a really, really bad rate, obviously, so because it's way bigger. But again, let's go back to our scenario manager. Okay, go best, and let's go for a cheaper home, honestly. Like, we don't need to be going absolutely crazy on this kind of stuff, right? Okay. Oh, that's because it's referring to it down here. But essentially, I'm able to change these guys up, right? And anytime I change here, anything that's referring to it will also end up changing. So this is a much easier way than going in, changing it. I have all of these at a glance. I can switch between them as I please. And if we wanted to, right, relate this back to what we were dealing with before, right? We want to see things in a nice, easy pivot table, right? What's great is if I go to what if analysis scenario manager, I can go best, worst, average, whatever, and I can click this little summary icon down here, right? I could ask for a scenario summary, or I could ask for a scenario pivot table, right? So now I can clearly see all of the different variables that I have here, right? I can go up, down. I could switch between anything that I want, right? This is right now not very informative, right? Maybe I need to switch the fields themselves, or maybe I need to make it a little bit more descriptive, change what it's based upon, right? I could also, instead of doing it that way, right? Let me go back to my scenario. I could instead, maybe the pivot table is not really what I want right now. Go to summary, and I can just do a scenario summary, right? This pops up as a beautiful little table here that will show a summary of all of the changes I made. So if let's say I had a result going on in D10, actually, for the purposes of this, let me actually, instead of having it refer there, I'm going to have it refer to our monthly payment up here instead. So I go to Scenario Manager, go to Summary. Okay, no, I don't want I want the results for the monthly payment. Give me a summary. Now that I'm actually referring to the right cell, it's going to give me a summary of every combination that I can create, and it's going to show me what the result is in a nice table. I don't have to worry about switching between things. I don't have to worry about saving things. Everything is all nice and organized. This is a perfect example of how what if can be used to show a whole bunch of different perspective options. Okay, so that is our scenario manager. Okay, so before we go on to the last topic, right, just as a summary of kind of what we went through, because there's a lot of moving parts today, right? This what if analysis has three sections. Our data table, right? We can have a one variable data table or a two variable data table, and we base it on either one substitution variable or two substitution variables. Then, right, we went into goal seek. If I want to, instead of having an output that has all the possible options, I want to manually change this to have a specific monthly payment. I only want to pay $1,000 on my monthly payment. It will change the down payment or the percentage or any field that I want so that I can make sure that I get that amount and it manually changes it. Finally, scenario manager, the one we just covered, right? I can choose different scenarios. I can navigate through them as I please. I'm in the wrong spreadsheet. That's why it's not popping up. See, this is the purpose of having actually organized spreadsheets. This is a horrible way of organizing them. Do not call them sheet one, sheet two, sheet three. I'm using this as a scratch pad, so that's the only reason why I'm doing that. But if I was actually creating spreadsheets for projects, definitely would not be doing this that way. Go to my scenario manager, right? I can switch between these. I can choose what I want to show. I could change all the values. Does it automatically? Changes all my references. No need to update anything. Go to my summary tab. I could either make a pivot table, which going back to yesterday's lesson, or nice, beautiful little summary of everything that I need. Just make sure you're returning the correct results in this case. Otherwise, it's going to be blank like this, right? D10 had nothing in it, right? So all of these are just nice little ways of kind of showing perspective data, right? If your boss asks you to find all the possible futures of switching all these different values around, all these moving parts, don't hand code it. Do not program it yourself. Have Excel do it for you. Show this beautiful scenario summary chart, and you can get it done in like under 10 minutes, and then you get the rest of the day off. So no need to worry about that. Final thing we're going to talk about is add-ins. And I'm going to be honest, I just found out that these existed today because these are not built into your computer. And honestly, you might have issues depending on what Excel version you are in. As a result, do not really worry about this topic very much. Just know that it exists and it allows us to do a little bit more than we could with just our standard um with our standard functions that we had used before. So if I want to go and get these add-ins, such as the solver add-in, right? I'm going to go in my Excel, right? And I'm just going to go to the spreadsheet over here, right? Now, if I go to home, there's a bunch of add-ins over here, and it'll say find more add-ins at Microsoft App Source. We're not going to do it that way. We're not going to go downloading a bunch of stuff that we don't need. We want the add-ins that are from Microsoft itself. But who knows, maybe you find a really cool add-in for something that you're using. You can use them just by going here, right? It's like a Chrome extension. This is just an Excel extension. The way we're going to get this specific add-in is I'm going to go to Tools, right? And I already had put these in here, so they're going to appear here as a solver, right? But if you don't have that in there right now, right? Instead, what we can do is we can go to the Excel add-ins down here, and these by default might be checked off. You can choose to check them on, or you could browse, right? I think there's probably some others too. Oh, okay. These are just if it's built in onto your computer. These are the two that are specified in the slides themselves. Um, there's a couple of pages of notes that talk about quick analysis. Again, not something that I have on the questions for the exams, but there's shortcuts that allow you to do things way quicker. This is the quick analysis section. And I'll be honest, I couldn't get it to work on my computer. That's why I skipped it entirely, right? But they're right here. So if you want to find shortcuts on doing things way more efficiently, take a look at any of the slides that say quick analysis on the top and make sure you have this analysis tool pack, right? Makes you able to do things a lot quicker. But for the time being, you're not missing anything by not knowing that, right? All of the things that we've done before have done it, right? This is just going to pretty much open a menu that makes things slightly easier to find, right? It's nothing too crazy. The one we're going to just talk very, very briefly about in the last few minutes is the solver add-in. Okay, so if I go back to tools and now solver appears, right? I get this little pop-up over here. And this is kind of just a more in-depth way of doing the previous what if scenarios that we had before, right? Maybe I'm looking to do something similar to goal seek, right? I want to find a specific objective. I want to find the max, the min, a value of by changing variable cells. What are my substitution variables? What am I changing here? This also allows me to have specific constraints, right? Perhaps I'm doing some division, right? You don't want to divide by 0. Maybe you want to make sure that you have things that are only integers. Maybe you want to make sure that you're not dealing with fractions if you're dealing with the amount of people, right? I can't say, oh, I'm going to have 5.5 representatives. That doesn't make any sense. You can't have half of a person. So you can do all different things that way. So as an example of what that would look like, right? Let's say I'm doing this objective here. I have my formula, right? This is the formula that we coded in, just like on the previous set goal and data tables and everything. Okay, maybe I want to find the max or the min, right? Whatever I want to find. Or if I want to find a specific value, there's a whole bunch of ways you can do that, right? Changing variable cells. Where are my substitution variables, right? So maybe I'm changing just my APR. Maybe I'm changing APR in the down payment. Whatever they are, put them in here. List of constraints, right? We know that data tables by default are going to give me a bunch of a bunch of values here, right? Maybe I only want to output things that are less than 1500, right? So this is greater than 1500. Whoa, that's way out of my budget. I don't think so, right? I can specify that here. I can say maybe this cell has to be less than this, or I can't get a better deal than 4%. So it has to be less than 4%. Or the down payment has to be greater than or less than a certain amount. Maybe the bank is very stingy with their money. This allows you to be way more specific with the way you are looking for a specific goal. Again, this is more in depth than honestly we would need to go at the moment. Just know the 3 methods we went over today, right? The scenarios, goal seek, and our data tables, both the 1 variable and 2 variables. And that's all that you really would need to worry about. But this is a very helpful little thing here that kind of just allows you to really be more in depth with this kind of stuff, right? I can create constraints that I couldn't have in my previous methods. So if you had something like a very specific application, right? Maybe general formulas don't do the trick. Using our solver add-in is a great way of doing that. Okay. And again, you can change the types as well. Integer int just means integer. Bin is binary. Diff is making sure that everything's different, right? Maybe you have a variety of tasks that you have to distribute and you don't want everyone getting the same task. You could use something like that. Again, a lot of really cool ways of expanding on the knowledge that we already know. Okay, and pretty much if you were to do the results, right? The solver, just like goal seek, is going to give you a solution. You could say keep the solver solution or restore the original values. Maybe I realize, oh, nope, that's not the value I want. I just did it as a test. I could restore it just like that, right? Sometimes solver will find a solution, sometimes it won't. It might be an impossible problem. You don't know. But again, just like with goal seek, it's meant to return a single solution with that. Okay, and with that, that is the end. Let's do the last couple of amplify activities, and that will be all for today. Let me just see. Okay. Open here. Okay, I realize that the two questions are kind of based on solver. Um, I would just say, I would just say again, for the purposes of the exam, don't really worry too much about that. But in hindsight, uh, when I was coming up with like the questions and stuff, just kind of had it like generate based on that. Okay. And again, once you finish the questions and the final, where are you at today? You're free to go. If you have questions, let me know. I'll go over these in just a minute or two, but otherwise, that will be all for today. That is the wrong. Okay. So when setting up constraints in solver, which option ensures all variable calculations return values that do not repeat, right? This is going to be our diff, all different. So in the constraints, we can change between if we want like integers, if we want binary, we want them to be all different, we want a max, we want a min, etc. Okay, and which type of solver report specifically displays the impact on the objectives as variables that are minimized or maximized? This is going to be based on our limits report, right? We have a limit, maximum versus minimum. And again, this is not as important. It's good to know that these exist and pretty much knowing that there are constraints that I can use, right, kind of helps us to understand things a little bit clearer, right? We can see that I can change what type that I want to get reported out. Maybe I want only the answer. Maybe I want to find out how sensitive things are to change. I want to find the max or the min, right? All these different ways, know that they exist. Don't need to worry about anything else with that. But yeah, hope you guys have a great day. And if you have any questions, stay behind and I'll be happy to answer them. Let me stop the recording.